Almost live from Silicon Valley, California, brought to you by Mimosa Network. It's the Dustin and Eric podcast show.
Hi, I'm Dustin.
I'm Eric.
Today we're on episode number 9, troubleshooting and maintenance, the whole 9 yards.
All 9?
Yes, all 9. So today's special guest is Art Feldman from Mimosa Support. Welcome to the show, Art.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
So speak to us in Russian.
Sure. So, let's start in some Russian. Я буду говорить по-русски. Меня зовут Артур. Как вы пожелаете? Дастин, твоя рубашка очень красивая. Эрик, не очень красивая рубашка.
I'm not sure what's being said, but I'm sure it's something bad. So, Art, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do here at Mimosa?
Sure. I've been with Mimosa for a year and I would say almost 2 years. Be November 21st. It'll be 2 years in Mimosa. I do their technical support engineer, third tier, and I also do the documentation as well. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I started in technical support about 20 years ago for a wireless company called Proxim. This is actually the third wireless company I'm working for. Enjoying Mimosa very much, and back before wireless, I worked for the first PlayStation, did the technical support for them back in the 90s. And you guys remember the sniffer network analyzer at Network General? The actual
network analyzer.
Okay. The actual appliance.
Wow, I've seen a few of them, but
so where you can actually analyze the token ring packets and Ethernet, ATM.
BER, bit error rates.
Well,
on some of that's part of small part of what that thing could do.
Oh yeah, the thing was the original actual device cost thousands of dollars. Now you can get it on a software basis.
Dang.
So we went from $1,000 to available to everyone around the networking world.
Just use a laptop.
Now
that's
the case. Yeah, before you have to actually have a device to do it.
Big heavy. Yeah.
So
wow.
So how many kids did you have call PlayStation support?
The best part about the job was I get to play video games as I was helping customers. So it was a pretty cool.
That reminds me of my last job where I played games while helping customers. Although,
you weren't supposed to,
I
right?
wasn't supposed to be, but they didn't care as long as I did my work. So,
Yeah.
All right. So we're gonna go ahead and catch up with Eric and myself here. So, Eric, what have you been doing over the past few weeks? You missed the last show. You want to tell us what you were doing the last episode of this?
I was out of the country. I was in Russia, and I needed an interpreter, so I brought Art along. That's why he was gone about the same time I was gone.
From Russia with Love?
Yes. It was lovely.
It's a great movie.
We've been house hunting up and down. I got to cut my commute in half if I can. And hey, can I tell you a dream I had the other night?
You can tell me and everybody else.
It was like a 30-second dream. So I had Alec Baldwin in my dream. So Alec Baldwin's my boss in the office, and he called me over to my desk and said, "Hey Eric, get over here. I want to give you your performance review." And I said, "Okay, Alex." I go over to Alec's desk, and then he starts up, and I say, "Well, hold on a second, Alec. I'm very hungry. I haven't had my cold cereal. I ran out of milk. I haven't had my cereal." And so I run back over to my desk. I grabbed a piece of chicken, oily chicken, with some napkins. I took a bite of the chicken, brought it back to Alex's desk. And then I'm wiping off my fingers, and they're all oily and shiny, right, my fingers. And then Alec looked at my fingers and said, "Oh, nice nails." And I said, "I'll have to run out of milk more often." And then we both kind of chuckled. So it was like a 30-second dream.
You mean like
That's
a
what
3-hour dream,
That's what
right?
I did. That's what I did the other night.
Okay.
That's how I recall.
And for the rest of the night, you had so 20
It's very
seconds.
exciting. It's very exciting. If you're house hunting and you need more things to do, maybe you want to write your dreams down. But this one was so good, I didn't have to write it down, so I'm just recalling that for the show here.
I always have strange dreams, but I never write those down. So
Are you ever going to tell us any?
No.
You don't want to know Dustin's dreams. It's probably a bunch of IT stuff, though.
Sometimes.
I'm just getting you off the hook. I know
So
it's not.
anyway, this last weekend, well, hell, it's
what'd you do?
almost
What
next
you guys
weekend,
doing?
so I don't remember. At least last night. It's not really the weekend, but we went to a comedy club, and actually our local Starbucks barista just down the parking lot here is a comedian, headlined the show. It was really great.
Okay.
So moving on,
And now it's time for the interrogation room where we answer submitted questions from the audience. Number one, my link is only getting 60 megabytes per second. How can I fix this?
Art, you're a perfect person to answer this. You want to elaborate a little bit on
So-
a few possible answers here?
Not to tease Eric, but if I'm getting 60 megabytes, I'm pretty happy. 60 megabits per second. That's another. That's
what did I
another.
say?
You said bytes.
Megabytes
I
per
want
second.
bits. Thank you.
I want bytes.
Thank you.
Bytes is great. If I'm only getting 60
BY.
megabits per second, depends on what is the link actually set to. If you're set to 100 megabits per second and you're only getting 60, then that's fine. That's per your intent. If your PHY is around 500, 600, and you're getting 60 megabits per second, then we check the wireless, make sure it's balanced on both ends, TX and RX, and if we can confirm that you're getting the proper amount of streams, the wireless side looks fine, then we're going to troubleshoot the Ethernet side.
Might be a little bit of a roadblock. You might have maybe in the router some issues.
Oh, okay.
It could be all kinds of
right. I mean, it could be anything, but you have to eliminate the variables. Maybe take the system out of its current setup, connect your laptop directly to one of your ends, and start troubleshooting. Maybe you run an iPerf test.
Okay.
Make sure it's not a anomaly that you're seeing on the switch or router side, and figure out whether it's something to do with from wireless to Ethernet, and then go from there.
Exactly what we're going to talk about later on the show. So,
Number two, can you run through what each chart means on the cloud management system?
well, this is another perfect one for Art since he's our documentation guy and support guy. So, Art, do you want to run through different stuff on the cloud real quick?
Sure, I think we can do it maybe as a team. Sure.
Okay.
Let's go ahead and do that.
So here's the first one, and this is the throughput graph. We have under the legend we have throughput, upload and download. So it's pretty self-explanatory, but you want to talk about it?
Sure. Just when you're looking at this graph, just make sure you clearly understand if you're looking at 1 hour, 24 hours, or 3 months. What happens is, so via your browser, it's collecting throughput data every second. But when it's actually posted to the cloud, which posts every 5 minutes, for 1 hour, it's around every 10 seconds of data, and it's basically averaged out. But if you're posting 24 hours, it's a longer period of time. So they basically take that information that you're seeing on a 1 second basis, average it out, and that's what you're seeing for 24 hours. And if you look at 3 months, it's maybe 20 minutes of average data. So that gives you a little bit of perspective of what you're seeing
Right.
when you're looking at throughput.
So you'll see a little bigger picture. Those little amplitude or spikes in amplitude, et cetera. You'll see those kind of narrows.
Exactly.
Squeeze in or
It'll change. Exactly.
Okay, cool. So every 5 seconds it posts data, or 5 minutes it posts data. I'm not losing any of that data. It just
No.
takes 5 minutes to post.
It updates every
Right.
5 minutes to the cloud.
Okay.
Yeah. But it's collecting it.
So our next one here is our PHY upload download rate, and under legend we have upload and download rate. So you want to talk a little bit about this one? Explain the differences between the upload and download.
Yeah, so this what kind of concerns me. So if we get a customer and he's having this type of performance, what you're looking at is basically 300 megabits and in one direction and 90 megabits in the other, and that kind of reflects in the in what we're seeing in the PHY results. So when you have an unequal, when it's not balanced and it's unequal amounts, that's an issue. So what's going on? Is it the interference is a problem? Is it what else could be happening? Is maybe you have different transmit rates on one end and the other.
You got a C5 here. Maybe some firmware issues.
Exactly right. If one's running one version of firmware, you've got the A5 is running a different version. Absolutely.
Okay.
But this would be a concern. So the good thing here is that you can actually, if you're looking at 24 hours, it's consistent. 300 megabits is consistent for that period of time, and it kind of fluctuates for the in the other direction. The 3 months will give us a better perspective. How was it before?
And how long has there
was
been inconsistencies on the downlink for a long period?
Right, because it's starting to drop, right? It was at a peak point, and then now starting to doing a little bit. So
see it tapering off
right
on the right side.
So is the interference growing? Is there some noise in the channel? Those are all all things you want to look at.
All right. So on our next one here, we have upload packet loss rate. So you want to talk a second about that?
Not really a screen we use too often. I mean, in this case, there's really not the percentage pretty low. Not really any errors or issues.
Can you
In regards
elaborate
to packet loss?
under the legend that says log Mac drops? Do you know what that is?
Basically, this is how it's being recorded by the log.
Okay. All right. And next here we have upload per tab. So if you want to talk a second about upload per and what that means.
Yeah. So per is basically packet error rate, and the UL is an uplink, or one direction is downlink or uplink. So what you have here, let's say if we look at the percentage, this would probably not something we were going to worry about. And you guys probably already know this. So we look for around 3% is an issue. What happens at 3%? Basically, the modulation rate will change. Will go down by 1.
MCS rates are going to suffer.
Exactly. So if we're looking at a 1.25 at a max, perfect.
Okay, good. All right, so our next slide here is receive signal and noise. So we have average noise, RSSI 1, RSSI 2, total and max noise. So do you want to go through and explain what each of those are in relation to this graph?
Sure. So this basically we're looking at the chain 1 and chain 2. We're probably looking at the horizontal and vertical at this point. So what you always want a larger gap between the noise and your actual performance.
Yeah.
And why do you want that? Because of SNR. The SNR we want to look for is around 27.5 to 32 dB for maximum modulation rates.
I see over a 24-hour period for this this connection, noise floor is nice and consistent and steady. We could push that out to the 3-month tab and see if it remained like that the whole
absolutely.
whole time. Huh?
Yep. Good idea.
Looks decent here.
So what's the difference between average and max noise then?
So the maximum noise is the average is basically over a period of time that's averaged out for you. Maximum noise is what it'll hit at its peak at its
Right. So it's just picking up spikes of interference, like on this graph here. So it's kind of up and down.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a good point. And that's at 24 hours. So I think if we went to 3 months, then we could see some peaks. We could see some noise peaks and amplitude. And so that would be more of a steady. At 3 months, it would smooth that graph out, but you'd see a little blip here and a blip here on X day, right? So yeah, as it comes across, we've got a smooth average. But if we stretch that out, we might be able to see some individual amplitudes over the weeks.
Right. If you stretch it exactly over the 3 months, or if you shorten it to 1 hour.
All right. So our next graph here is download SNR. We have under the legend SNR 0 and 1. So do you want to tell us the difference between the two?
Yeah, so what we're looking at here is actually the streams of going for horizontal and vertical direction. Or actually, this could be the we'll need to check if it's the streams or the actual chain itself. But I think this is it possibly it's the physical chain going for horizontal and vertical.
So it looks like from this graph, there at the end of it, they're having a little interference on horizontal or vertical, whichever chain that is. Right.
So also what we can do is for when we're troubleshooting, if we click on events, we can actually we'll get a better we'll understand if there's a change in channel or if there's a if we did a reboot or any event that actually occurred, they'll give a better.
I think in the example too, for this example, actually both chains are kind of following each other, which is a good thing. Although there's, like you mentioned, there are some additional drops in that second chain. But overall, we can see kind of this very similar pattern for at least this 24-hour period example on this one.
But
right?
when it fluctuates,
yeah,
that's where the event would come in handy because you know, hey, did they change the channel or did they make any kind of change that would lead to that?
And we'll show events in a moment. So
okay.
All right. So the next tab is download MCS and streams. So what's stream and what's MCS? What are we looking at here?
Sure. So MCS is basically your modulation rate. So MCS, anyone want to guess what MCS means?
8, 9. Oh. Yeah.
Modulation, and
Modulation,
code
there-
sequence.
Sequence. There you go. Yes. Yes.
So that's basically what modulation we're using, and we always want 9 is the maximum. 0 is you're down in the dirt. You're not transmitting or transferring packets at that point. So 9 is where we want to be. But if we're around 7 to 9, we're still getting good throughput and good performance. Streams is so like chains is a physical connection. Streams is your data connection. So you can have one chain, but you can have 2 streams per chain.
Your horizontal, vertical polarity.
For streams,
fields.
right. So the chain is the actual vertical, horizontal,
Yeah.
but the stream is the data being
full flow.
being sent. Exactly. So in a non-interference environment, you're going to have 2 streams.
All right, cool. And then we're moving on here to errors, and you have several different errors here under Legend. Upload CRC, upload retries, upload fail, upload SP errors, and upload LP errors. Do you want to just touch a little bit on what each one of these mean?
Sure. So the SP errors and LP errors usually you have with interference, or when you have a device like when you have an antenna sitting right on top of another antenna. Then you have your LP errors, or if you have some other interference from other radios next to your Mimosa gear.
Mm-hmm.
Had a customer actually mentioned a case I had today. If you look, we were examining customer's network. He had 14 clients. 2 of those clients were having very poor PHY performance. So we were looking at what is he getting for errors. Under the one that was performing great, he was getting 173 for 20 megahertz bandwidth. There was
173.
there's like the count of errors he was getting was 2 errors. When we looked at the LP count and SP error count for the one he was getting performance of 7 in each direction,
A lot of hits.
20,000
Okay.
count.
Wow, that's amazing.
And the SP LP errors. So we knew exactly that it has to be interference. When we did some additional troubleshooting with the customer, we found that it was basically he's got other equipment around his.
Yeah, you look at that client's location.
Right.
And
But,
just- and you
well,
get it
yeah, and he starts to look at it. Goes, okay, so
Yeah,
I know
what's
the
there?
issue is interference. So let me go and troubleshoot that. The other errors are basically CRC errors, check redundancy errors. You got your fail. So basically, what happens is if it can't send, if it drops a packet, it holds off, and it'll wait. So you're losing time. So if it's not transmitting, then you're losing. Basically, it's your jitter and latency will go up. And for another one on the bottom is failed, so it's additional retries.
Okay. What are the preambles that come in with the packet transmissions and
That's-
reception?
so
those are initial handshakes and hey, are we here? Are we going to come?
Right. So that's the LC.
How does that work
That's the
with
SL. That's the other one. That's the one. That's the SP errors and LP errors. Those are the preamble errors. Those are those are the ones caused by interference.
All right. And then we have our temperature graph here. That's pretty self-explanatory. You can kind of, and this is not ambient temperature, but this is actual board temperature. So
It's more of an internal
Right.
temperature. So it's
So, and we're looking at something that's just like 60 to 74, 80. Now that's not Fahrenheit. That's centigrade.
it's Celsius.
So obviously we're
Yes.
looking at an internal chamber or inside a radio, and we're looking at the ambient temperature on the PC board, and in Celsius. And we're looking at internal temperature on a board.
Right. This is
Celsius.
it's
So
in the device.
it-
It's in the device itself. We're not. It's not clear if it's the chips or it's just the
or
board.
whatever.
It's the board.
It's somewhere in the
It's
board.
in the unit.
Okay.
all right. And then one last thing, we talked about events. So I've got a short shot here of after you turn the events on, you can kind of see, without mousing over them, you can't really tell what they are, but you can see something's happened where the blue lines are at.
Right. Right. So the great thing with this tool is that, like you said, if I mouse over, I can see what the event is. But also, if I highlight a section, it'll blow it up.
Yeah.
And then I can because when the lines are closer together, it's harder to tell what's happening, right? Even if you can, if you place your mouse over it, it doesn't really know. You don't really know what each line is referring to. So if you blow it up, you can see a little bit better.
In addition to that, obviously we're on the 3 months. I'm seeing like May to July, so we're on the 3 months. So that's everything's compressed a little bit here. So that
Well,
helps.
expanded.
Yeah, it helps to expand it or bring it out. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, so we'll move on here.
Number 3, my radio's Ethernet is at 100 megabits per second. How do I fix this? Did I get that right this time?
You did.
Oh my!
So,
Yes.
from personal experience, I've found that almost every time you have 100 megabit issues on your radio, it's either because of cabling or even more common that it's the cable ends themselves.
Yeah.
Because if you don't crimp them, all your copper isn't at all your pairs and stuff are at the end of the cable end itself. You crimp that. It might come up, it might pass traffic, but it's not going to link up at a gig.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you got 4 twisted pairs in there. You got 8 conductors. And let's map those out to make sure. We do a physical inspection, even outside in sunlight or evening. I take a flashlight to the RJ45s and expose and look at just kind of a quick visual inspection. However, you still want to map that stuff out because I want to make sure that all 8 connectors are good at one end, and then at end A, and then at the other end B.
Right.
We go almost up to 100 meters often for some runs, and you better make sure those RJ45s are on board. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't appreciate how difficult it is to actually crimp the cables until what was the other video?
The cabling video,
The cabling
which
video.
you were in.
It just takes one wire. You got pin 3. White blue. It's out, and you get this 100 meg, and so that's the easy part to troubleshoot. Start with the simple stuff. Just look at the mechanical stuff,
Right.
and then go
And I mean, don't you agree that that's something that people usually take it for? Well, we take for
Yeah.
granted because we
Yeah.
think, hey, cable should be fine. I crimped it, should be working just fine. But that's a lot of times. That
even
is
pre-made.
that is the issue.
You go online or you go to your local retailer and you grab stuff, pre-made jumpers. Sometimes those are bad. Sometimes those are bad. So you can
And
always
it's-
try to eliminate the simple stuff.
It's really easy to screw up a cable in too if you're not paying super close attention. And even if you are, sometimes you have one of those copper lines jump over one another and you crimp it down incorrectly.
Roll it.
Oh yeah,
They'll
absolutely.
roll. So we've all seen a pair that we call it rolling. It'll roll inside there, or
Mm-hmm.
encroach on another pin slot, and these things pop up.
All right, so
Yeah, just one more comment about the 100 megabits. I think we talked about the importance of grounding. So I had an interesting situation. Happened basically once or twice with a customer. He was using a surge arrestor, like one of our NIDs,
Oh yeah.
but he didn't have it grounded. So and he was getting 100 megabits. So his conclusion was that we basically cannot work properly with a surge arrestor. But once he actually grounded the unit, and because he did a great job of actually grounding all his radios. He knows what he's doing, but the NID itself or the surge arrestor was not grounded.
So the connectors were okay, the wire's okay, and they inserted a NID or a protection device, and then had to eliminate stuff because he goes, why am I still at 100 meg?
Right. So he eliminates the NID. He sees, hey, I'm getting a gig now.
And then he puts the NID back in.
Right, and that's why he thought we don't work properly with surge arrestors.
And even checking the jumper or the other thing coming out of the NID, it didn't matter. Once an X NID was in place, it got the 100.
Yeah.
Also, just that discharge or that potential maybe buildup inside the NID, and that stuff wasn't being pulled to earth. It was causing a 100 meg negotiation.
It was happening both ends, exactly the same
wow.
100 megabits.
Interesting.
So
Okay.
just something to troubleshoot.
okay.
Question number 4. How often should I inspect my tower installs? What should I check?
Okay, so I'm going to start off with that we're not professional tower inspectors.
That's right.
So everything we say here is our own opinion. Please do not hold us to that. Many people will have many different answers, and those aren't official either unless it's an actual tower inspector. Part of the first question here is how often should I inspect? So in my opinion, you should inspect at least every 6 months to a year unless there's a major occurrence like a major storm that comes through. Because even if you took a hit and none of your stuff goes down, that doesn't mean that something didn't happen. So you can go out and check and see if the light is still working on the top of the tower, if it's something that's taller than 150 feet. If it's not, then you know the tower took a hit. you should check your surge suppression stuff and make sure that it also didn't take a hit, because some of that stuff fails where it'll fail and not protect your equipment anymore, but it will continue to function. So after it takes that hit, it's not going to take another hit, because if it does, all your stuff's going to get fried.
Fuel in the backup generator. That's
Right.
a good one. Yeah.
So this comes back to what should I check for. So just your stuff in general, you should check your cabling. You should check your LMR cables, make sure they're still sealed up or not damaged. Check and see if your dish mount is loose. If things have gone down and your dish is turned sideways, then you know for sure that it was loose or came loose. So make sure they're tight. Check for bite marks or cracked cabling. And then even inside the building, you want to check and make sure everything's grounded. There's no loose lugs or anything like that. Because if you've got a ground wire that's not terminated, you've got what's called a floating ground. It means it's not grounded at all. All of your stuff's going to build up ESD and potentially fry everything.
If you got a little, so you've got a little telecom shelter up there, more than likely you're not the only one that shares that space. So
Right.
look at your bundles as they come into your rack or whatever you got set up there. So if things get bumped, there's also lots of coax in there. There's different things.
Hey.
You mentioned check for the jacket, and you really want to check for the jacket. Rodents love plastic and PVC and pipes, and they love the jackets that are on all copper wires and stuff. They'll just chew.
Right.
And so you really want to, if you have an intermittent problem, you look at some of this stuff.
All right.
Numero 5. I'm starting a WISP thanks to your show. So where do I go to learn about design, installation, troubleshooting, etc.?
So Mimosa has a lot of great tools to help you out. We have our design tool. We have all of our documentation that Art painstakingly keeps updated as best he can. We have our community page where people go and ask for help, get answers. There's also a great organization out there, WISPA, who have shows in October in Las Vegas, and then in the early spring, late winter time in the Midwest in different areas. They have lots of training, lots of people that are there just like you, people who've been through the same stuff that you're about to go through or going through right now, that are more than willing to help design or help you, discuss, go through troubleshooting with you. Again, there's plenty of training courses at these events that you should go to, and it'll help you start your network. It's not going to help you 100% because a lot of this stuff you're going to learn while you're actually doing it, unless you're just a professional, you've done this a lot. But this show isn't really geared for that. It's geared for those folks who've never done it before or starting out. So it's a lot of good info. And then they also have some Facebook pages where people are more than willing to share their opinion about certain topics. So it's up to you to decide if you want to listen to their opinion or not. This is a WISP Talk and WISP Picks on Facebook. So I see new members on there all the time posting, they're just starting out. And there's hundreds and hundreds of people who respond back and, talk about their own experiences and share their own opinions on things. Mm-hmm. So feel free to check that out because it's really a good place to start.
Number 6, I have partial Fresnel zone blockage because of trees. Can I still have a reliable link?
Well, Eric, you like talking about Fresnel zone. You want to talk about this?
Sure. Ideally, we want line of sight, LOS. We want direct line of sight with no obstructions locally out in the field midway or at the other end of the link. However, sometimes we do have blockage of trees. I had a 5 gig, mile and a half 5 gig link, C5 on one side. And we kind of changed out the radio and put some more gain, a little better antenna, and bumped it up a little bit. But the Fresnel zone's there. So the client, for example, is still experiencing some errors and such. But she also I explained it. What was going on, and then she loves the service is great, and she loves the uploads and the downloads, and they do VoIP and they do Skype things, so they need that video and they need the quality for upload as well, but the speeds. But she's going to get out there and have somebody like trim the trees and so on. And I guess this also depends on what part of the spectrum you're in. So we're at we're at this is say 5 gig. That's going to be a little. It's going to be more noticeable as we go up in the spectrum, say 10, 11, et cetera, or 24.
Right.
And then it does the little bit opposite effect for foliage and blockage as we go lower in the spectrum.
Like 3.6 or 2.5, 2.4, 900
Some
megahertz.
of that stuff really
you know.
kind of can burn through a certain amount of thickness, in trees and stuff.
Right.
But
All right, so we'll move on here to today's main course, troubleshooting and maintenance. The meat and potatoes of everything that you've come to listen to. So we're going to start off here with troubleshooting. So the first thing that you need to check if you're using the Mimosa Cloud is check your cloud data. It has a lot of good data, which we went through earlier with Art here about all kinds of things for access points, backhauls, and client radios. So each of those are going to be a little different. But they each pretty much have the same information. But it's definitely the first thing you should check because you've got your 1 day data. Your 1 day data, your 1 hour data. If you're a Cloud Plus subscriber, you have 3-month data that you can kind of look at and compare. So what do you think, Art? Do you think checking your cloud data is the first step?
Sure. I mean, just to get an overview of what's currently happening, I think that's a great place to start. Again, it doesn't update. It only updates every 5 minutes,
Right.
so it's not as accurate as actually going through your user interface.
Right, but it'll at least show you if something's changed.
Absolutely.
Because you might not remember what your UI, your spectrum looked like before, but you'll at least see changes every 5 minutes on your graph.
And you may not be on site.
Exactly.
Right. You can do this where if you're out at McDonald's or if you're if you're just out at a movie or something and want to check what's going on, you've got the cloud that you can utilize.
Right. And so the next thing you should check, since you already have cloud data, or if you can log into the UI of your radio, is the spectrum. Because you never know when somebody else has moved into the area or somebody else has changed the frequency on their equipment and either doesn't mean to or does mean to interfere with you. You can use our real-time spectrum analyzer to see that change on your radio so you can effectively move the channel if there's spectrum available. Sometimes in some countries you really don't have any options regardless of what channel you're on. So it's a good indicator if you need to change your channel or not. Or even to a different type of equipment with different frequency.
Absolutely.
So
Would recommend that you actually select the combined view.
right. That way you can see both the access point and the client or clients depending on what system you're looking at.
Yep.
All right, so the next thing is to actually go out to the site and check your physical installation. This accounts for towers and houses and commercial buildings. Depends on where you're having the trouble at. But go out and make sure, like we talked about earlier, that your dish hasn't moved or somebody hasn't put a dish right on top or below or next to yours. You're just looking for damage or just any kind of change whatsoever. So cracked cabling, water in your LMR cables, which is really, really common, especially if you don't use mastic tape or you don't seal your LMR connectors up very well. You'll see definite drops in signal or a complete drop of your link if it rains. So there's lots of things to go out and actually look for if you can't determine what might have happened with your cloud data, or even if you have determined what it is and you have to go out and physically check what's going on. So there's a lot of things you can do on site to check that out.
I think it even, and on the same note, if you're checking your cables, let's say RF jumpers, you could even, and you have a known issue, you might even be dialed into your UI while you're up on a tower up there. You're looking at the radio. You could swap your cables. You could swap the positions on the connectors,
Right.
and see if that issue follows as you swap. And then you look at the jumper, and I'll be darned if there's some water ingress or a bunch of water pours out, and hey, maybe that was the issue.
Well, if the
Time
water
to
pours
try
out,
something.
it's not a maybe. It's pretty much your issue,
That's a
Hey,
problem.
that's it.
or
I'm gonna-
one of your many issues.
One of your many potential issues, yes.
All right. So the next thing, for especially client locations, is make sure your customer hasn't screwed anything up. Hopefully, it's not this bad where their house is on fire, but
It's my house.
you never know.
Oh my gosh.
Art, what did you do wrong? So there's plenty of common
Now you
things.
tell me.
There's plenty of common things that happen out there. So customers, if it's a POE indoors, they unplug it, plug it back in wrong, or I've seen where they actually take the outdoor cable and just plug it into the back of the router because they don't understand what they're doing, or they plug the WAN cable into router port 1 through 4. There's all kinds of different things the customer can do, and it's a lot easier to try and talk to them over the phone before you go out there because you end up spending money on truck rolls. But it's inevitably going to happen that they mess something up, and that's what the issue is going to be, especially if it's a micro pop or a mini pop location. They technically have access to that equipment because it's in or on their house. So
Sure.
Who knows if they took a weed eater or a lawnmower and ended up, cutting some cables or something like that. So it's good to check on that as well. And then some basic things here is to check and or replace one thing at a time. So when I'm troubleshooting an issue, I start at the very end of the chain where the problem is, and I work my way back one step at a time or one location at a time to see where I can find where the issue is or where the issues are. And you'll always find your problem that way as you go back. You go to a tower site, slow throughput, you plug into the backhaul coming in, you make sure you're getting good speed. If you're not, you go to the previous tower or location and do the same thing, and you just do this over and over again until you find where the problem is. This slide here, it's got some pretty good advice on it. Always start with simple things. Is it plugged in? Change one thing at a time and then double check the effect. So just don't do multiple things at once or you're never going to know exactly what the problem was. And I have a bad problem of doing more than one thing at a time, but it's hard to change your ways.
You said reverse any changes. Does that include like maybe a firmware?
Yeah, exactly.
change or
So
something?
if you go out and you plug something into a different port, things get worse, then to revert that change, or firmware upgrade. If you upgrade or downgrade something and it starts acting worse, then to revert that change.
Yeah, but you make a great point though. If you've done too many things at one time, hard to go back and revert. What are you reverting?
Everything.
If
You have to revert
If you
everything.
can't remember what you did, then
And that's-
but if you do it one at a time, then it's much easier to take a step back
That brings in another point. That's a good point. Also, you might be solo. If you have two or more people working on or troubleshooting something, then that's where the communication comes in.
Right.
And you get on your radio or you get on your phone and say, hey, don't touch this. I'm going to touch the blue wire. Stand by a second. And then you tell them what you want out of that, or if anything, they'll tell me if something changed. Okay, now I'm going to go to the red wire. Anything change? And anything that changes, you report back. So you make sure the communication in the circle of the team is
I
there.
had the pleasure of watching you guys work,
Yeah.
and that's exactly how you guys do it. You guys communicate very well together.
Our work is very pleasurable.
I had
Wow.
the pleasure. Your work was decent.
Decently pleasurable.
Okay, so moving on to maintenance.
We're starting to drop off a little bit. I'm just picking it back up, baby.
Yeah. So moving on to maintenance here. So
Is that a box of diapers in the picture?
it is a box of diapers in the picture.
All right.
So check your cables. If you have a nice and neat server room or tower shed or whatever, it's going to be a lot easier to check your cabling than you just have a bunch of cables kind of strode everywhere, just going wherever you want them to go. It's easier to trace out a problem with, labeled cables and RAN cables in a tray. However you're going to do it, just make sure they're organized.
Labeling. And both ends of a copper or a fiber conductor, all that low voltage stuff, audio, video, satellite, IT, label both ends. And we also want to make sure that somebody else, not a family member, or maybe a family member that's technically savvy, or the next technician that might touch a wire 3 years from now can read the label. And you want to do plain, just plain language, and no hieroglyphics, no weird symbols. But if it's master bedroom, you might abbreviate something like MBR, or master bath m.bath to save space. However you do it, just make it plain and simple to read for the next guy that's going to go in and touch the wires.
One word of advice: just leave some kind of a legend to show why, to understand why it's been
legend.
Actually, that's a great point too. I was with a company and we left documentation on site for the family, for the commercial property, the folks in the building, and for the future text going in. And we we updated the sleeves in the binder, and there's block diagrams, there's multi-zone this and that, and so on. And you could go in there and actually go, oh, I see. And you put it together. If you made changes, you put the date on the change. So you're going, oh, is that wire put in there 7 years ago, or is that the thing that Bill touched last Tuesday? So you kind of keep it flowing. It's a living doc.
Absolutely.
If you go to those extents. But we just want some kind of labeling and consistency.
This reminded me of my previous company. This our service room almost looked exactly like this. And
Which one? The one with the diapers, or the other one?
the one on the left.
Oh, okay.
So what they did was they actually put all the information on the blackboard. But
Chalkboard?
no, it wasn't chalkboard. It was
Blackboard.
it wasn't a board, so you can you can erase it, which is okay unless someone actually erases it. So some of the information was starting to fade,
Yeah.
and they
Yeah.
used acronyms, so it was very
Yeah.
hard to understand what there was, and nothing else was labeled.
Most
So all-
techs love acronyms too, but they gotta make some sense, right?
So we
Yeah.
came in, we had to basically recreate the wheel because we didn't
Okay.
know what
Yep.
what everything meant.
I have to retone stuff out. There's a bundle of 24 blue wires right there, and they're all the same cat flavor. And so KF5, E6, whatever it is, 7, and they're all the same flavor. So you're gonna have to go in there and tone.
Well-
You go in there and tone everything out and relabel everything and so on. There's a lot of work.
Right.
It's some time-consuming stuff that you might have to get up to.
Right. So real quick before we move on to the next slide is check your cables, check for cracks, check for fading. If you have cracks and fading, that means you're not using outdoor rated cabling, or you're using a certain vendor's first gen of cable, and you should probably replace that immediately. So won't name names here, but I'm sure everybody who listens or sees this knows exactly what I'm talking about.
Here,
Check for chew marks. That's signs that you should probably put your cable in a conduit because you have some kind of rodent that's trying to eat your cable. And then check for kinks, because it's really easy when you're pulling cable that it kinks up. And that's going to end up either breaking the copper or fiber, or it's going to make it weak, where if it's bent again, it's going to start snapping the copper or the fiber. And it's definitely going to cause you issues down the road if you don't pay attention to that, or if you don't replace that when it happens.
And for fiber, look at fiber. That's especially, you got to especially be careful with optics, because these little pinches and bites, it can cause events down the line. And we'll put a TDR or an OD or whatever OTDR unit in. And we'll see these events go out over the line. You can, and sure enough, you can go down 315 feet in on that piece of fiber, and there's a pinch there or something. And another thing with wire and cable maintenance, you'll see a lot of Velcro strips being used, and you see zip ties and things like that. And let's take fiber. You don't want to put a zip tie, even if it's barely pinched, tightened down, right on a fiber piece. You're going to want to put some protection over the fiber, maybe a little roll of Velcro, and then you can kind of put the zip tie over the Velcro that contains the fiber, or keeps it managed and such. And I have a grounding note on here too. You see the ground wire in the left picture up there? See that ground wire? Mm-hmm. Now technically, let's say we have 8 pieces of gear in that 19-inch rack. Let's say it's a 6-foot rack. You get a lot of rack space. Got a lot of spaces. You're going to want this is how you bond these things, and check for your local regulations. But you actually take a pigtail off of that CPP, that copper patch panel there, and that Nettonic switch or whatever whatever you have. Each one has a ground terminal in each device. That just includes copper patch through panels as well. Each one takes a short, light sweep pigtail from the back of the device at the ground screw point to the rack. And then the next guy below it, the next device, has the same thing. Each guy gets a little short pigtail that bonds to that 19-inch rack. From the 19-inch rack will go then to earth. So we all have common bond points to one rack and then go to earth. And we don't loop anything. You don't go from this switch with a pigtail to this switch. You keep looping it down. We want individual bond points that are bonded to our rack.
So you don't want to daisy chain your equipment.
You don't want to
together.
daisy chain your bonding.
Information.
So Next is that you want to check your antennas. So these are the antennas, the connectorized antennas, or even the integrated antennas you have on a tower or a commercial rooftop, or even, again, a residential rooftop, especially if it's a mini or a micro pop location. Check your LMR cables. Check your mastic, make sure it's still sealed up well. Check for cuts or any kind of breaks in any of your cables or LMR cables, because even though they're outdoor rated, if they've been in the sun for 10 years, it's probably going to see some fade or some wear and tear on it. You want to check for any kind of apparent physical damage to any of your antennas or cabling going to it. And then you might want to check inside of your radome.
Mm-hmm.
So for those watching, you can see this GIF of acorns falling out of this dish when they pulled the radome off.
I was wondering what that was.
This is the infamous, hey, squirrels dropped acorns inside our radome. But actually, I read more on this. I saw this about 8 years ago, and actually what happening here is they determined woodpeckers put these nuts inside this radome, and they looked at the front of the radome, and there's large chew and pecked out points. Right, squirrels aren't pecking and putting big holes in pieces of metal generally, right?
So Woody Woodpecker was
so
involved there.
So they've determined it was a woodpecker that did multiple openings, and then they started just stashing. Now, the rates the nuts per pound rate here. I don't know how long it took for.
So
was it the whole woodpecker family, or was it a single woodpecker over the course of 12 and a half years? We don't know. Yeah.
So they said there was over 50 gallons of acorns, and it was 300 plus pounds extra weight on the dish. So you can tell that at least the dish mount held up to the extra weight on it. So
I wonder how long the link was, if it stayed up or if it,
no, the link actually went down,
and thus the truck roll investigation.
Poor woodpecker, all that work. Look at that.
Doggone.
Done it.
The woodpecker's on the ground right now with his mouth the beak open. He's all.
What are you guys doing?
No, all my work.
No.
All my work.
All right, so
Mr. Woodpecker is looking at Mrs. Woodpecker, and just, honey, get this on tape. The Mrs. Woodpecker's she's got an iPhone 3S. The Woodpeckers, and she's filming this.
That's old, man. All right, so the next thing, since you're already at the tower site, is what we talked about earlier. You need to check your towers, or if you're on a rooftop, check your rooftop for anything. You want to check for missing bolts or nuts. You want to check for any kind of rust. Yes, Art, I know that your mind's in the gutter now. I'm sorry.
Go on.
Is it? Art, where is your mind right now?
Check for cable damage again, which is what we talked about. Check your ice bridges. Check for trip hazards. Check your grounding. There's all kinds of things that you need to check at your tower sites. Right. Even if you don't own the tower, it's still good that you inspect everything yourself, because not everybody's perfect. They're going to miss something, or the tower owner doesn't care and they haven't been there to inspect their site in 3 years. So it's good to always check every time you're there for any kind of problems.
Is that a cable run? What is that?
It looks like it's so old that
it's a cable run.
There's vines going up. It looks like they're so old. There's vines. I don't know what
wow.
Right. Yeah. This tower is pretty
oiled,
pretty bad.
Yeah. There's an issue.
Wow.
Small issue.
And the last thing is check your batteries. So if you have a tower site or a rooftop site or even a house site, you almost always will have a battery backup system. And if you don't, you should think about putting a battery backup system in so your system will never go down. But you want to check your batteries every year at least, even though you're probably good for a few years. See if it's charging or if it still has a charge. Because if you don't have any kind of monitoring system on your batteries, you won't know that they're not working until you lose power there and your stuff goes down.
It's also good practice when you install a battery. There's a date code on all these batteries, regardless of the chemical the chemical consistency or the chemicals in the battery itself. But there's a date stamp, and it's kind of hieroglyphics. You got to go to the manufacturer to figure out when that battery was put together. But what you want to do when we install a battery, we're going to put the date on that battery, and then you can go back and as you inspect, and then there's gases that come off of some of this stuff. So you want proper ventilation when we're talking about battery backup and et cetera. But you can also put a load on these guys and test them under actually a load and see how they perform and see what's left in the battery itself. Is it still good? Is it we need to swap this thing out and so forth.
You also want to check for corrosion.
Corrosion
and-
on terminals.
Right.
Yeah.
And then you want to check for any kind of burns or any kind of cable that might look like it's starting to
Yeah.
melt or melted cable.
Deformation of the housing, and right, you always use the proper terminal, the ring terminals or whatever you do, and the proper wire gauge to handle the load, the current draw and the loads that these things are under.
So this picture here, we've got what looks like an exploded battery. So what do you think might have caused that? Temperature or what?
I don't know, load and heat and no ventilation.
Yeah, no
Maybe
ventilation.
Got it overloaded and blew it. It warmed up. Those chemicals will get nice and toasty in there.
All right. And then moving on to our last thing, tech tip of the week here. So our tech tip this week is when you unlock a pair of backhaul radios or any Mimosa radio, make sure they are unlocked to the same network. It's really easy for somebody who has multiple networks to unlock a backhaul link, one on one network, one on the other. If they're not unlocked to the same network, you're not going to see both radios in that particular network cloud. So it's going to say that the link is down or it's up, but it's not receiving data from the other end. Then if you go into the other network, then you're going to see the exact same thing for the other radio. So just make sure that you unlock them both to the same network. If you don't, you can always move it from one network to another to help correct that as well. So how often do you see this in support, Art?
Actually, our customers actually do a pretty good job of unlocking to the same network. We do get this on occasion, and what sometimes happens if you unlock with different email addresses, same name but different email, that will
Right.
get you every time. So
All right. So that's the end of the show this week. So real quick recap, we talked about troubleshooting and maintenance. So we went through cloud data, including checking your spectrum. We talked about checking your physical installation, making sure your customer hasn't lit their house on fire, and replacing one thing at a time for troubleshooting. And then for maintenance, we talked about checking your cables, your antennas, your towers and rooftops, and your batteries. So next week, or on the next episode at least, it's going to be podcast number 10, where we're actually talking to a WISP, and we're going to go through and we're going to grill them about how they set their network up, how they do their routing, how they do their troubleshooting and maintenance. Everything we talked about in the last 9 shows, we're going to make those guys answer on the air here.
All right.
That way you know exactly what these guys went through. It's not going to be the same thing for you usually, but it'll be a good, good thing to listen to what they had to go through to get to where they're at now. If you have any questions you want to ask these guys, it's a secret right now. I can't tell you who they are, but if you have any particular questions, feel free to email us at podcast@mimosa.co. Also, you can see our previous shows, of course, on YouTube. We've also got plenty of other good videos we've put out. Eric and I are always busy doing those kinds of things. So, Art, really appreciate having you on the show.
thanks, Justin.
Thanks for speaking some Russian for us. Feel free to
was
say
awesome.
bye in Russian. I have no idea what that is. So,
До свидания.
goodbye.
Well,
All right.
Thanks to our crew, Ian and Mike, for putting it all together, too.
Yeah, thanks,
Awesome.
guys.
Thanks, Art.
All right.
Awesome.
We'll catch
Thanks,
you guys
guys.
next time on the next show. Thanks for watching.
All right.
Thanks for tuning in. Please hit the subscribe or follow button to stay up to date with our latest podcast, which will be available on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, and SoundCloud.